Ladies and gentlemen, it's the Nerdcast! Woo! I am your host, Pete Dakin, CEO of Wordnerds, and joining me is my partner in linguistic crime, Steve Erdle, CSO of Wordnerds. Steve, nice to have you on the Nerdcast.
It's a joy to be here, Pete. Thank you so much for having me.
It always is a pleasure. I look forward to these little afternoons spent.
Little tete-a-tete.
Yes, chewing the
thing.
fat. It is. It's a wonderful thing. And thank you so much to all of you joining us today. We can't see you because that's not how this medium works. Get with it, people. So what have we got for you today? We have been speaking to Catriona Handley from Terrapinn. Terrapinn, if you don't know them, are the organisation that run World Passenger Festival every year. Steve, what did we speak to Catriona about? What's our interest in World Passenger Festival?
Well, I mean, I think your interest in the World Passenger Festival is you get to go to Amsterdam every year, which is entirely a fair reason to do it. But no, it was a fascinating conversation. I think ultimately what we talked about was what makes a great public transport company. Like, what are the things that public transport companies are doing right now to make themselves better? We've taken a bunch of social media data and we've looked at it to try and find what customers across the world are thinking in this area. And Catriona gave us some really interesting feedback on what the industry is doing to try and help people and make a better experience for their customers.
Exactly that. So if that sounds like your bag, then do hang around for the next 40 minutes or so and find out what Catriona had to say. Before we get into the meat of the discussion, though, let's talk about what we've learned this week. So, Steve, what have you learned this week?
I mean, it's been a great week for learning. I was recently at a conference called Trafex, which was in Birmingham, so I went, as opposed to Amsterdam once where you go.
That's how this works.
That's exactly how this works. Not better at all. It was a fascinating conference though, and lots of really interesting things came from that. One thing that really stuck with me was a woman called Karen Coventry who works for Stagecoach, and she was talking about how she worked towards uniting bus companies and local councils in her area to serve a kind of a common goal of getting people out their cars and back into using public transport. And it just struck me as a really interesting thing for customer experience professionals across the board. Oftentimes we think of, and I know that we also personally think of our competitors as evil people who want nothing more than the destruction of the planet. But oftentimes you have similar goals. So I thought, and her message was, what can you share? What are your common goals? How can you work together towards them? And it was a really good reminder that actually sometimes working together with your sector can be a really positive thing.
I think that's a lovely message.
It's a lovely message.
Disagree that that's how we characterize our competitors.
No, they're lovely.
I think there are some competitors we would characterize like that, but also we work really closely with them. But
100%.
yes, no, you are right.
What have you learned this week, Pete?
As little as possible. No, so as you know, I am a technophile. I enjoy technology for its own sake, and I'm endlessly amused and impressed and inspired by the ability of humans to learn stuff. What were you going to?
Absolutely. You've had that particular midlife crisis where you just love gadgets and gizmos and that sort of thing.
Yes, that's sadly true. And as you know, I'm a big fan of AI, and we've used that extensively at Wordnerds since before their first album was out. Right, we had AI when there was only us and some emos down the record shop listening to it. And it's really interesting to see the rate at which AI is inveigling its way into other things that where people already are. I think people have worked out that it's a big jump to get people onto Midjourney or ChatGPT if they haven't kind of got some sort of frame of reference. So I'm really interested in things like Copilot, things that will help with the kind of Microsoft suite. And there's a guy called Ben Collins who does an Excel newsletter that I get because that's how exciting my life is. And he let me know about this thing called Simple ML, which is a workplace add-on for Chrome, which basically hooks up sheets to TensorFlow. And and allows you to do all kinds of things in a spreadsheet that relies on machine learning. So, for example, one of the issues we get often is we get bits of data that where some cells are missing.
Bane of my life.
Bane of yours. So it will fill in automatically based on various laws of probability. It will fill in gaps for you. It will predict things. So just for fun, I put in Sunderland Football Club's league finishes for the last 20 or 30 years. It thinks we're going to finish bottom of the championship this year. Which fair. I mean, I think that's probably
AI really works.
It really does.
Oh, it's incredible.
So it's a really accessible thing. It's a really easy thing for people to use. It's 2 clicks. You don't need to know any data science or anything like that. And I'm just loving the way that AI is becoming an integrated part of some of the things that that we're doing in our normal day-to-day lives. And I urge anybody to go and have a play with it. It's free.
Shall we put a link in the show notes to this? What sounds like a really exciting thing to use.
Does that mean we're making show notes?
I think we might have to make show notes now.
Kelton, make some show notes, please. Sorry, you might have worked this out. Poor old Kelton gets all the rubbish jobs. Okay, so we've both learned something. This is a wonderful thing. Hopefully you guys have learned something too. But the main thrust of this is to hear from Catriona. I think it's just worth contextualizing. One of the many things that we like about World Passenger Festival is the World Passenger Awards. It's not just about going to Amsterdam and having an awesome time for 3 days, but last year for the first time we launched the World Passenger Awards. I think that's been a ton of work for you, but it's been a really, really interesting and useful experience, and we've had an amazing reaction from it.
Oh, it's been wonderful. And I think that if anyone in the transport sector is listening, it's a celebration of all the great things that your sector has done this year. And you have done so much, and your customers do realize it.
Great. Just before we play the interview, I know you're going to take the piss out of me about the Catriona thing.
I've been so good about that.
You've been so good, but I know it's coming. The question is, are you going to do it now or are you going to do it at the end? Should we do it at the end?
Should we do it at the end?
All right. We'll do it at the end. All right. Oh, here's Catriona.
So we are joined today by Catriona Handley from Terrapinn to talk about World Passenger Festival and the World Passenger Awards. Catriona, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to the Nerdcast.
Thank you. So lovely to be with you.
Oh, isn't that nice? And also, as ever, my partner in linguistic crime, Steve Erdl. Steve, are you looking forward to some World Passenger Festival crack?
I am thoroughly excited about this thing. It's a wordnerful event and a really exciting thing that we're doing here. So yeah, let's get into it.
All right. So you mentioned the event. Wordnerds have been going to World Passenger Festival since we were a tiny dot in the startup competition. I think World Passenger Festival startup competition was the first competition Wordnerds ever won. So it has a special place in our heart, aided greatly by the fact that it's always somewhere swanky. I think last few years have been in Amsterdam. This next year's in Vienna. Catriona, tell us a bit about World Passenger Festival, who goes, what it's about, and of course your role in it.
Yeah, so I'm the project director of the World Passenger Festival, and it's an annual event bringing together the leaders in public transport industry, people who are really focused on improving the experience for customers and making the whole experience of traveling by sustainable public transport more easy to navigate, easy to plan, easy to book, easy to manage, and hopefully sort of working towards that modal shift away from flying and driving towards sustainable travel. So yeah, we bring together rail operators, bus operators, urban mobility providers, shared mobility providers, but also the technology innovators that are supporting them to sort of reach these goals. So yeah, we do have a startup village where Wordnerds joined us at the start and won that competition. So it's a really exciting event where there's a lot of optimism about the future. So yeah, I love it.
Yes, and we've been hanging around like a bad smell ever since, and you've been unable to get rid of us. No, it's great. It's one of the first events we look for in the calendar. It's a fantastic thing for everybody in the transport sector. And last year, for the first time, Wordnerds partnered with the guys at World Passenger Festival to do the World Passenger Awards. Steve, would you like to just give us the top level view on, this latest in a long string of stupid ideas we came up with in the pub that ended up getting us into trouble and causing us a load of work?
Absolutely, I'd love to. I should probably start by saying I've never actually been to the World Passenger Festival, because whenever there's an event in Amsterdam or Vienna or somewhere lovely like that, then Pete tends to go. If it's in Basingstoke or something, then we'll send Steve along. But hopefully I will break that duck very soon. The World Passenger Awards, I mean, I think what we have picked up on in our time in the rail sector and the transport sector more generally is when you're working on improvement, it's easy to get lost in the negative comments, and social media being social media, the majority of the comments that are sent to transport companies are negative. But there is so much positivity out there. There's so much, individual staff members doing amazing things, new innovations happening, new approaches in things like access and disability. And we thought it was worth having something where those comments were flagged and seen. So we created the World Passenger Awards kind of as a way of having an award system that was entirely chosen. The winners were entirely chosen by the general public. There was no filter, nothing. It was just, this is what your customers are saying about you. So we have gathered over 1 million social media posts over the past year, posts that were aimed at over 100 transport providers that have come from 31 countries and 6 continents. And at the World Passenger Festival, we'll be announcing the winners in 6 different categories, who's based entirely on what their customers have said about them over the past year.
Fantastic. Thanks, Steve. And before we get into what those categories are and talk a little bit about the shortlist for each in this year and generally the trends that we've sort of seen in it, Catriona, just from your perspective, when we hassled you with this stupid idea about World Passenger Festival Awards, why do you think it made sense to you? Do you want to just give us a bit of insight about where you see these fitting into the overall event?
Yeah, absolutely. I really liked the idea when you guys came to me with it last year. It was quite close to the event, so it was a bit of a challenge to turn it around in time. But I think, a lot of the conversations at the show are either looking at very specific projects, or in the more general conversations, it's really looking at how can we do better and try and reach these big goals around sustainability and modal shift and all of these things that operators want to achieve, and kind of not necessarily looking at the great stuff that is already going on and that's already being achieved. So it's an opportunity for our audience to really sit back and say, we're making an impact to our customers on a daily basis, and it is appreciated, especially because Twitter can be quite a negative space. I think it's really nice to sort of celebrate that. And then after the awards, I had a lot of feedback from people, even if they were just nominated, just saying, my team back in the office was so grateful to be noticed on these sort of topics. It really sort of boosts their morale. So yeah, hopefully we can do that again this year by sort of celebrating the everyday great things that are going on in the industry.
Fantastic, thank you. And so unlike us to come up with an idea at short notice that we haven't really prepped properly and make it somebody else's problem. That's never happened before, ever.
I'm just grateful I'm not doing the Twitter data analysis. I leave that up to you guys.
Well, that's a job for Steve. Steve and his data cave. That's his idea of a good night in, genuinely. Anyway, so the 6 categories that we've got this year, there's actually 7 awards because there's also an overall category, but there are 6 distinct categories, 4 of which are aimed at train operating companies and 2 are more general transport companies. So we've got before we travel, at the station, on board, accessibility, and then an award for best metro or light transit provider and best bus provider. So there are 6 categories. Let's take them one at a time. Steve, do you want to tell us a bit about the nominees for Before We Travel and what you saw? Jeremy, I'm not suggesting you go into depth about each of them individually. We'll save that till the awards night. But just talk to us a bit about what you saw in that category while I was in the pub having fun and you were in your data cave going through all of the information.
I wouldn't swap with you, Pete. Yeah, no, it's absolutely, as you say, for rail, because it's the second year we've done it with rail, we thought it would make sense to split the awards essentially across the customer journey. So we started with the Before We Travel, which is things like booking, the online experience, ticketing, pricing, that kind of thing. one of the things we noticed this year was that a lot of nominees, and this was quite widely seen, so across India, Spain, the US, and the UK, there was a lot of compliments for apps, for the apps that people were using to book and to pay. It was one of the highest increases in discussion from last year, but it was also saw quite a big drop in sentiment. It was the third lowest drop in sentiment since last year. So it seems like this is something people are talking more about, and when it's good, people are very positive about, but expectations are rising, they're getting higher. So Catriona, I'm interested to know kind of in terms of what's expected of providers now. Does every provider need an app, and what makes a good one?
Yeah, I think this is something that we've been talking about at the event since I started working on it 8 years ago, really sort of the digital channels where people need to book. As consumers, obviously, we use apps all the time, and you're benchmarking apps against, huge companies like Netflix and Spotify. So every operator is kind of unfairly being compared to those sorts of companies when transport is so complex, especially when you start taking into consideration sort of solutions like mass, cross-border travel, disruption. It's really complicated stuff. So I think most operators out there do have apps. And they aren't all the same. Some are obviously better than others, but I do think it's an area where there's increasing focus from consumers, and I'm sure we'll just see that keep on growing into the future as Netflix and Amazon up their game. So will the rest of the app world. So, we've got a couple of sessions looking at that this year. PKP from Poland will be talking about their sales channels, and SBB have just renovated everything, and they'll be talking about sort of, do you need different apps for different purposes, different sort of segments, different solutions, because there is so much to try and put across in a user-friendly way. There's so much to talk about. So yeah, it's an interesting topic for sure.
I think it's fascinating that competitors aren't necessarily the comparators that consumers are thinking about. This idea that we're comparing everybody against Amazon or everybody against Netflix because they're offering the best kind of customer experience is I think right. And I think, of course, as we record this podcast, there's lots of stuff in the news about different information being pushed out in the rail industry in different apps. There was some stuff just in the last few days about national rail inquiries and Trainline, and everybody looking for a common standard because different people's information is saying different things, which is obviously confusing from a consumer perspective. So yeah, lots of elephant traps there, and I think it is one of those things that we already take for granted these days. So well done to the nominated talks for appearing in that list. We'll obviously be publishing the list alongside this podcast. Let's talk next about the at the station category. Steve, lots of bikes in this one, I think. Lots of bikes, yes.
I think it's interesting what Catriona was just saying with the apps about do people want a one-stop shop, or do they want different things for different places? And I think that ability, the kind of smooth process through the different things is also really relevant from people's door-to-door journeys, from when they leave their house to when they reach their final destination. The volume discussion around bikes has increased at a higher rate than any other subject since last year, which I thought was really surprising, because this is, we talk about apps as if they're a new thing. Bikes are certainly not a new thing, but that kind of process we've seen real positive, and I will give a couple of shout out names. We've seen the likes of GWR in the UK, Irish Rail have been nominated for excellence with regard to how they go about dealing with that process of getting bikes, of incorporating bikes within a train journey. But bike space is always at a premium. And one interesting kind of development this year in particular has been the advent of e-bikes, which has this kind of both this gray area on, does that count as a bike? Can I take that into the usual bike rack? And also, could there be a place on board to charge your e-bike as you're going from place to place? So I think the future of that integrated cycle to the station and cycle from the arriving station to your final destination was talked about a lot this year. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on it, Catriona.
Yeah, absolutely. I think active travel probably really started to gain traction as a talking point in the industry during COVID, when we were sort of all thinking about moving around in different ways. And I know there are so many operators that try and support this. Obviously, the event has been in Amsterdam for the past few years, and you can't but notice how much space and priority they give there to bikes and other modes of sustainable active travel. And I think there's more and more pressure for operators to work with regions and cities to support that, because obviously there are so many benefits to active travel, like air quality and health and things like that. So it is increasingly a priority. And that first and last mile, how do you get to the station, is something we've talked about for a long time. So we do have a couple of panel discussions with representatives like the European Cyclist Federation, who are obviously very pro cycling, but also operators talking about initiatives that support that. I think also security is a big issue, especially when you're talking about e-bikes. My husband had his e-bike stolen from a station, so I know this firsthand. And I know that SNCB are doing some work in their innovation program on that topic, and their head of innovation will be talking about that this year. So yeah, there's so much to talk about, and I think it's something that a lot of operators, obviously it feeds into the sustainability and all of these topics. So yeah, it's a really interesting one.
Got to hear about your husband getting his e-bike stolen. That's horrific. And although I have to terrible, I have to say, whenever I'm down London these days, I spend so much of my time on those line bikes. I think they're such a good alternative, and you don't need to take anything with you. You can just unlock it with your phone and hoon around London, and it's just so much fun. So yeah, I'm all for it. Interested in the discussions, and I'll be checking into a few of those when I'm over in Vienna, obviously while Steve isn't allowed to leave the country. For the next one,
I'm meeting in Milton Keynes that week, so
so the next category is we've bought our tickets, we've checked the apps, we've been to the station, we're about to get on the train. Next category is on board. Steve, what have you seen from the data from the onboard category this year?
First of all, I want to apologise to Milton Keynes. It is a lovely city, and I don't know why I chose that. Yeah, on board, I mean, it will come as absolutely no surprise to anybody that the biggest talking point, particularly positive talking point about on board, was the staff. They are still generally a TOC's greatest asset. That's where we saw the most positive responses in any kind of conversation. There was a big increase in discussions about catering this year. And that, again, was across the world. We saw it in the Hokkaido Railway in Japan. We saw it in CD in Czechia. Apologies if I've mispronounced that. And even Transport for Wales in the UK. We've seen improvements in catering, and also a trend, or a quite welcome trend, of these providers showcasing national cuisine on their train. We saw some really interesting comments around different types of national cuisine being kind of showcased in the catering car across the world. And I wondered, to what extent do you think that catering can become a point of difference for TOCs, or is it always like an add-on extra kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, catering isn't necessarily something we talk about a huge amount at the event, but something that I remember very clearly from last year is we had Alexander Shevchenko, the Deputy Director of Communications and Customer Experience from Ukraine Railways, joining us. And they really use food to showcase the Ukrainian culture and cuisine to their very high level international delegates, prime ministers and presidents from around the world that are coming to Ukraine, to Kyiv, by train. So that's something that sort of jogged my mind when you mentioned this. We have seen innovations around catering, around things like ordering to seat. I know that's something that a few of the UK TOCs have implemented. But I think there's room for innovation here. I think doing it in a way that is profitable for the TOCs, whilst also an enjoyable experience for the customers, is something that really still could maybe do with some innovation. So yeah, if there are any companies with ideas in that space, do come to the Startup Village at Passenger Festival, because I know there's interested operators looking for cool new solutions there.
I love this. We know from years of working with Tox, there's a disproportionate amount of comments always about the quality of the bacon sandwiches. People get really upset about bacon sandwiches when they're getting the train, it turns out. I also very much appreciated the way, Steve, that you slipped effortlessly from Milton Keynes to Hokkaido in Japan without blinking an eyelid. I think that was just that's the kind of international jet setter that you are. Okay, so that's the on-board category. The next one is a subject close to our heart. It's something we've done a lot of work on, in not just in rail and transport, but in different sectors as well, and produced a bunch of reports on it. Access and accessibility. What's in the data, Steve?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting mixed bag in terms of access. There's areas where positivity has been really high this year, particularly around passenger assistance in getting on and off trains and that kind of thing. It was a big leap in positivity this year around that, and it feels like, while there are still issues, it feels like an area of improvement. Conversely, there have been dips in some scores as well, particularly for provision of services to blind and deaf passengers. We hear things along the lines of announcements of platform changes only being audio or visual and not both, and so people not knowing when that's available. We've seen people describe the kind of feeling like there's less support in those areas. So I'd be interested to know, kind of, Catriona, what have you seen or what have you noticed at the festival around what can be done to support those groups?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a topic that I've seen sort of grow in importance for the train operators over the past few years, from my perspective. I think, there's more awareness of the range of different sort of needs that different passenger groups have, whether that's deaf or blindness, wheelchair access, but also things like the sunflower lanyard that sort of shows hidden disabilities as well, people that get anxious or have sort of overwhelm in busy environments. And obviously not all of the solutions need to be highly technical or expensive. Some of the solutions here are things like putting announcements on a board as well as through the microphones. So I think there's a lot of work that can be done that's just really put yourself maybe in people's shoes that you don't personally have experience of. So, spending the day in a wheelchair, just to understand what are the barriers to access and what simple things could be done to improve that. Last year, we had a really impactful session by Good Maps, one of our sponsors, where we had a very busy keynote session, and we just very slowly turned down the lights, and people just thought, something was wrong with the lighting. And it was really to give the sensation of being blind and being in an uncomfortable space. And I thought that was just quite good at getting people outside of their day-to-day experience and trying to make them understand, how it is for others. So yeah, there's lots going on in this space that's really positive, but definitely so much more that can be done as well.
Wow, that sounds incredible. This really does sound like an amazing event, Catriona. I'd love to be able to go sometime, but unfortunately not been given the opportunity.
The Good Maps guys were fantastic. They were next stall along from us, or a couple of stalls down from us last year. What a fantastic bunch of people as well. I think they were just great fun. So yeah, look for that. And I think the hidden disabilities, I've got a little boy who's autistic, and he looks like every other kid, and he has different challenges, and it's really hard to tell. And that's definitely a topic that's close to my heart. And I think there's been some great discussion on this. I think the accessibility track at last year's conference, I went to a few of the things on that, and I thought it was really some really interesting stuff going on there, and good to hear that it's something that's growing in importance as the event continues. Okay, so that tops and tails the stuff that's train operating company only. Where in our part of the world, we're just about to receive delivery of brand new metro trains, which we're all very excited about, because if you want to get around in the northeast of England these days, it's been an absolute lottery for the past couple of years, since our rolling stock hasn't been replaced since 1842. So that's all good. But Steve, what's the rest of the world looking like when it comes to metros?
Well, funnily enough, I think this is something. The thing I was going to raise here is something that is relevant in the Northeast and pretty much everywhere, which is that that connectivity between different types of transport when you have to when you're using multiple different types of transport to make your journey. So the connecting of bus and rail and tram and ferry. That was seen as an area where some people were doing it really well, and that was really appreciated. And for others, it was a really challenging thing and likely to cause distress in customers. We know it's a big challenge, and Catriona, I wondered what you saw as the big challenges in ensuring that kind of easy integration occurs.
This is a huge topic and one of the mainstays of many transport events, including the World Passenger Festival. How do you make it easier for people to use different modes of transport? I mean, planning your journey, but if you have to transfer between rail and bus or metro, for instance, it's a minefield. You need to go into different apps, different platforms, and I think access to the data is one of the biggest challenges. There's quite a growing movement around open data, which TfL has kind of done a lot of work with over the past few years. And we have the head of innovation, Thomas Abelman, joining us this year at the show. And also Hayden Sutherland, who will be chairing the digital track, is working on this for the transport industry sort of open data standards, because that will allow any innovator to sort of access correct information and then create useful apps and solutions for users. There's also regulation coming out from the EU around standardizing multimodal ticket sales and sort of standardization around the data as well. So there'll be a lot of conversations around MDMS at the show as well. But yeah, there's so much innovation, and then you can sort of broaden this out to all parts of the transport industry, looking at sort of cross-border things or even cross regions. If you go between London and Manchester, you have to have the Oyster card in London and something else in Manchester. It's a bit of a nightmare. So yeah, it's not easy, and it's not going to be solved simply. But there is so much work going on in this space.
Some amazing stuff at last year's festival from Germany, where they did that thing where they just standardized ticket prices across for any mode of transport for a week or something. And I remember some of the German guys talking to us about how that went and the uptake in public transport because of it. I thought that was a fascinating session from last time. So yeah, it's that connectivity thing I think is really interesting. Lots of opportunities there. And then the last one is bus. I think this is the first year we've ever looked at bus data. How was that for you, Steve? What kind of standards bus data in on Twitter these days?
Well, it's as with every other mode of transport, it's absolutely a mixed bag. There is gold amongst all of the swearing and shouting that you get on any social media platform, but there was a lot of positivity as well around buses, and I think a lot of the conversation around buses centered on the bus drivers, and I don't think that'd be a surprise to anybody. They're obviously an integral part of the bus experience. There was negativity around drivers seeing someone and not stopping, around them being impolite, but there was also a huge amount of appreciation for drivers that went the extra mile, for the announcements that were often warm and funny and useful, and helping passengers who were lost. I think about 5%, so about 1 in 20 of all the conversation online about buses mentioned the bus driver, which is, I think, quite a big number when you think about all the other things that they could be talking about. So it's definitely an asset for bus companies, and I was interested to know whether you've seen anything at the festival around how that asset can be leveraged, how you can improve on the situation with your bus drivers.
Yeah, so bus has been part of the event for the past few years, but this year we're sort of making it formal and having a whole 2-day track looking specifically at topics that are relating to bus. And something when I speak to leaders in the bus sector, they do very much talk about challenges around retention and employee engagement. So there's a lot of operators talking about that. It also feeds into diversity. So we've got a really important breakfast briefing that I encourage everyone to come to, which is around sort of diversity and making sort of everyone feel that they can do the job of things like a bus driver. But yeah, how do you incentivize exemplary behavior and, you know, going above and beyond for customers? Because like you say, it really is bus operators' biggest asset, and it's the touch point that users see day to day. So yeah, I think there's a lot to talk about there. And then just generally in the bus track, we're sort of looking at things like rural transport. So, you know, a lot of villages are sort of underconnected, and there's some interesting solutions that can be leveraged to support that. But also sort of going back to the last category as well, sort of how bus can better integrate into the wider transport modes. I think in the UK there's rules that mean that bus timetables can't be planned around rail timetables, which makes absolutely no sense to me, that you wouldn't get to a train station and expect to see a bus leaving in 10 minutes. Perfect. It's literally not allowed to happen. So there's innovation like on the policy side, but there are operators across Europe that are doing really interesting things here, like in Poland, where they've seen like a 60% growth in their bus users. So yeah, there's a lot to talk about, and I'm actually really excited about the bus summit. I think it's an undervalued part of our transport system. It's more flexible than rail. It can carry more people than an Uber. So yeah, some really exciting things to talk about there.
Is that true that buses can't plan their timetable around trains arriving?
I was told this by someone a few years ago. I don't know if the regulation's been updated, but yeah, I believe that is true. But don't come for me if that is incorrect.
It's just staggering, isn't it? I mean, you just wonder how that's been allowed to happen, even if it has been fixed, how that was allowed to happen for so long.
I really thought you were going to say there, is that true that a bus can carry more people than an Uber? And I was like, yes, Pete, that's quite a well-known fact.
That's how these people travel these days, is it? Obviously, I'm carried through the streets in my sedan chair, so I wouldn't know that. Okay, so that's our 6 categories, and that's a quick look at the data and some of the trends in them. As I've said, we'll be publishing the names of all of the companies that are shortlisted for an award, and congratulations to all of you who have made it thus far. I could not be more excited about the opportunity to go to Vienna for World Passenger Festival, and I will definitely be there for the awards due. And Catriona, thanks so much for turning over some time at the festival to us to deliver some of these awards. We're going to have, the plan is to have invite some people to give the awards out. We'll do these 6 category awards and then an overall winner. And we won't tell anybody who's won until then. So bribery is almost not worth trying. And I think there's nothing else to say except thank you, Catriona, for your time today. Steve, unfortunately, you can't do Vienna. I've just booked you into Concrete Con in Slough that week. So
it's an important event. It is.
Really sorry, man. But we'll find, I think there's a work experience kid in the Wordnerds office that we might take instead, or something like that, if that's not too bad. But no, thank you for your time, Catriona, and well done, Steve, and thank you for going through all that data for us. We will look forward with wild anticipation for the winners at World Passenger Festival.
Thanks so much. See you in Vienna.
And there we go. And that was Catriona Handley from Terrapinn.
Was that Catriona Handley?
Oh, see, you couldn't wait. You couldn't bloody wait, could you?
I wait for as long as I could. I tried.
Tell the story, because if this was the other way around, I would rinse you until you were see-through.
I mean, I think Pete is, as anyone who knows him can tell you, a very personable and kindly gentleman who really cares about the people around him. So if he's been working with someone for 4 or 5 years, it would be so out of character for him to not have pronounced her name correctly once in that half a decade time frame, which is what happened with Pete and Catriona Handley, who nevertheless has been so generous and kind with her time and with her expertise. I thought that was a fascinating interview with Catriona.
In my defense, she spells it stupidly. She's got O's in the middle of it and all that kind of unnecessary.
How Catriona's
O's.
Always been spelled. Like,
not in my head, it isn't.
Okay.
And also, in my defense, that little weasel Adam from Terrapinn introduced me to Catriona 5 years ago, and it turns out he does that on purpose, just to annoy her and to seed things like this. So, Adam, I'm coming for you when we're in Vienna. That's going to cost you at least a pint. But no, I have, ultimate responsibility is on me. I got that wrong. I can't imagine how insulting it is to know somebody for 5 years. Katrina's been super nice to us as well. She's been amazing to us, and we've been horrific back. So
this is your full and frank public apology.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I'm no stranger to an apology. So
I mean, I'm amazed we got to episode 2 of this podcast before having to do a full and frank apology, but here we are.
Okay, can we talk about the interview?
Let's talk about the interview. What a good interview it was. What was your takeaway? What did you?
What did I take away from that? So, transport is a super challenging place to be working at the minute. I mean, I think particularly in the UK, it's hard to be working with train operating companies in the UK with all of the stuff that's going on about media scrutiny and quality of service and, you know, a number of talks being put in kind of whatever equivalent of special measures is in the transport industry at a time when the government is completely changing. You know, you've got the Grant Shapps shenanigans that's completely changing the way that the rail industry is going to be set up. And obviously we're waiting until probably after the next election for that to really come in. But it feels like an industry that has been undervalued for a long time. It's an old industry based on kind of old infrastructure and it's not an environment where innovation is an easy thing to do.
Absolutely.
And I think Catriona sort of mentioned it in that interview, but we definitely got the feedback in Amsterdam. Did I tell you we were in Amsterdam last time?
Oh, were you?
Should have
that
come.
sounds nice. Yeah.
No, so one of the bits of feedback we got out there was people loved the fact that the awards were concentrating on the positive things, and obviously you can't completely ignore the negatives, but actually just having something that's pulling together the good practice and the many things that train operating companies and transport providers get right.
Absolutely.
Is a really important thing for morale because you know these people are just pilloried all of the time,
especially on social.
I mean, who was the last person that went on social and said, "Hey, Eleni, my train just arrived bang on time again. Thank you so much. You've nailed it again." I mean, it just never happens, right? So
I think that should be one of our messages is if you're out there listening to this and you travel on the train a lot, do let them know when it goes well, because it is a really, like you say, the vast majority of stuff that they get is negative, but there is so much good stuff happening too, and passengers, customers do see that as well.
Yeah.
I think I similarly what I thought was interesting about what she was saying was that there is, because you're right, that it's this hugely infrastructure led service. There's so much, and the making quick changes is really hard. But I thought Catriona's stuff about the low hanging fruit, think about the things that you can change, but quite quickly and easily, was really important. I loved the thing, because as I think we've established, I didn't go last year. I loved the thing of allowing the rail professionals in the room to get a sense of what it was like to be blind by lowering the lights and not explaining it and just, okay, deal with that for a minute. And then you suddenly, and I thought so much of what she said about one of the most important things, I think, for a CX professional of any type is empathy. It's the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And I thought some of the things that she talked about there was really useful. And actually, kind of a lot of the stuff that we try and do with our work is about trying to help organizations put themselves in their customers' shoes. And I think that ability to be emotionally intelligent and to empathize, including literally putting yourself in the situation of the people that you're dealing with, I thought that was great. I thought that was really fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that is really powerful. Do you remember, I think you did a piece of work looking at accessibility. Oh, it was for the accessibility report that we put out, looking at accessibility, and some of the issues were just things not being joined up. So
yes,
there was an example that we pulled out that looked at, there was a train with a bunch of disabled spaces in, and the people in the wheelchairs were able to use those spaces, and that was great. And on that train, there was a disabled toilet as well, which is also amazing. But the disabled toilet was on completely the other end of the train to where the wheelchair spaces were. So every time anybody needed the loo, they had to go in their wheelchair down the whole train and use it, which I've never had a wheelchair, but I can't imagine that's a lot of fun. And I can only guess at the number of people you wake up when you make that journey. Yeah. And I think that's kind of stuff like that, I think, comes out a lot in our data sources. And I love, I love the attention that the light that she shone on that kind of thing, and also what I liked about some of the stuff she was saying about hidden disabilities becoming higher up the agenda, and for obvious reasons that I've got an autistic son, and that kind of stuff I think it's hugely important.
Absolutely.
And it's great to see not just the rail industry but other industries kind of picking up on some of that stuff as well.
Absolutely, you can't always see accessibility challenges, and that is it's really great to know that there's a lot of innovation going on in that area. The other thing that really jumped out at me was instinctively when she was talking about the apps, she said obviously Netflix and Amazon are upping their game, so we need to as well. And I thought that was a really perspicacious way of looking at your customers. It's not just about the services that are similar to yours. Your customers' perception of your offering will be entirely colored by everything else that they use as a consumer. And I thought that was a really interesting way of thinking about your competitor analysis, looking at your market analysis. What are the organizations that your customer will think of you in the same breath as? And if your app is sitting next to Netflix's app or Amazon's app, then that's what you'll be compared to. I thought that was really interesting.
It was absolutely fascinating and totally irrelevant sidebar. No, great. It was fantastic to hear from Catriona. I still have to think every time I say it.
You got it that time.
Thanks. And we're so grateful for the Terrapinn guys for giving us the space at their conference to do these awards. Hopefully, if you're there, if you're joining us in Vienna, then hopefully you'll come along and enjoy it and support them. If you've been shortlisted for one of the awards, congratulations! I think it's it's a really useful and important thing. We will try and put out some badges and bits and pieces that you can get some sort of social love around, and let's really take some time out to just shine some light on some of the positive things that are happening in the industry. It's a really important thing. So Thank you so much to them. So all that remains is for us to say thank you so much for joining us today on the Nerdcast. We very much appreciate the time. We're not going to be those people that say, hey, smash like, hit subscribe, all that kind of thing. We do actually secretly want you to do that. We just feel a bit weird. It's not really in our nature to ask for that.
That's called having your cake and eating it.
Yeah.
I don't want to do this, but do this.
Yeah, well, that's kind of, it's an apologetic, like and subscribe. And more importantly, for those of you that don't know Wordnerds, we do have a product out there. We are a customer feedback analysis tool of some repute, I should say. We do the bits that AI-only approaches don't do. So if you have a problem with customer feedback of any description in any channel, if you want a single voice of customer that you can use to make strategic decisions, then we have people that you can get in touch with who will show you our stuff and you can decide if you want it or not. That's it from today. Thank you so much, Steve. As ever, it's been a pleasure.
What a joy, man. Thank you for having me.
All right, my pleasure. And we'll see you next time. Goodbye. Bye. Ado, badu, 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 badu. Ba, ba, ba.